How do I? I feel fine about that. Heavenly Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in you is the life humanity has lost in living. In you is the wisdom that humanity has lost in knowledge. And in you is the knowledge we have lost in information. Thank you for this little book by John Puddefoot that ultimately leads us to the discovery of what we have lost to be found in Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you, too, for Marty's work as he leads us through this conversation. We ask for the light of your presence by the Holy Spirit to edify us in heart and mind in how we might apply this material to honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
We are at volume 9 of 12 books, all in the series Theology and Science at the Frontiers of Knowledge. Today, looking at logic and affirmation. Not a very appealing title, just to make it more exciting. Perspectives in mathematics and theology. You just wonder about how enticing that sounds to people. But anyway, I think this is one of the richest books that I've seen so far. It's quite interesting, just in a sense, how aware he was of his audience and how he really tries to give arguments with examples that help to understand what it is that he's saying. So I have found it a rich text. Did anyone, read some and go, this is interesting, or this is hard, or anything like that? Yes, Bill, are you?
Me? Well, I noticed that this little book points to what I hear Torrance, what I have heard Torrance say over and over again on those ground and grammar tapes regarding mathematical theorem. If it is certain, it is not true. If it is true, it is not certain. Too bad I don't understand it any more than I did, but I guess might be on the verge, and you're about to help us understand that.
Yes, we will take that on today.
Yeah, and it was good to be introduced to the centipede. I had not been before. If you're gonna, do you mind if I just read the?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let's see if I can find it here. He introduces the prologue with something that's been attributed, although iffy, to Ms. Edmund Craster in the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. Prologue: the centipede was happy quite until the toad in fun said, "Pray, which leg goes after which?" and worked her mind to such a pitch she lay distracted in a ditch, considering how to run. That that I read that is a symptom of what's known as hyper reflection. Hyper reflection. Is that your understanding? That we
Well, it's
become,
certainly, I mean, whether that's the term we would use, that term works. And the argument to the book basically is that we've become so focused on our reflection about reality that we've lost touch with reality. So,
yeah, we become so, yeah, it's like we, he offers that quotation on page 20 from which I took the prayer by the chorus, T.S. Eliot's chorus from The Rock. Where's
yes.
the life we've lost in living? Where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? Seems like humanity's at a loss. He quotes
This,
Torrance only twice in here, but did you notice in the forward by Torrance what he said
yeah,
toward the end? I
And
think
what
isn't this the same general forward for all the books except when he begins to reference the particular author of this volume or
exactly right.
whichever. I think it is.
It is exact. It's all the same, except for in this case, the bottom of Roman numeral 10, where he begins into his discussion of the author.
He cutting into the last paragraph about the middle where he says there he continues, he's talking about Eaton, he continues to develop his keen interest in the conceptual interrelations between theology and science, and this in particular. In this distinctive contribution to our series, he wrestles with the fact that rationalism imposes upon us modes of thinking which threaten to cut us off from what is genuinely human.
Hmm.
Mathematics offers an ideal system of logic which seems certain, while theological claims and methods seem arbitrary and loose in comparison. Puddefoot seeks to explore some of the illusions we have about mathematical certainty and to make room for a more personal approach to knowing and being in which all aspects of humanity can find expression.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. So the nature of that certainty piece is going to be a part of this whole thing, and really Polanyi more than Torrance shows up as a major dialogue partner, but it's the Polanyi that Torrance quotes all the time. So in every quote of Polanyi that he brings in, he is also reflecting on what it is that Torrance would do as well. Um, One of the things about this author that I think is unlike any we've had so far is he's still alive.
ah,
I found
how old do
on
you think?
um, that's a good question. There's a website. It's EDSIL, Education for a Sustainable World. He's the founding
Hmm.
director and CEO of EDSIL, which I didn't find what that is, but a graduate of Oxford and Edinburgh. He taught at Eton College for 25 years. So it's the same guy as a mathematics master. This is
Yeah.
current to 2023. So in recent years, he's been involved in educational consultancy and startup in China, first with Sir Paul Judge, Bright Scholar Education, and later with the RCE, Suzu and Dragon Spruce Chanza. He was honorary principal of Futsu and Yiwu International Academics and the founding principal of Yimi Primary School in Chengsha, Hunan Province. Married with three daughters and four grandchildren, so he's in that age group where he has grandchildren. John sees education as a key contributor to human progress and the establishment of aspirations that are sustainable. And he goes on with some quotes of his. Um, so he appears to be, alive and kicking and doing things in the world of education. He's the fact that he's in China is interesting with a Torrance kind of connection. I believe he did, study some there at Edinburgh with Torrance. So if Torrance died in 2009 and he's still alive in 2023, he was a student, so he's probably at least um, I mean, he's probably in his 70s or 80s, but he appears to be, functioning well enough that he's managing educational initiatives around the world. So I wrote to Carrie and said, you might want to see if you can get a hold of him to do an oral interview of somebody who was part of the series that we're looking at, and just to get kind of the reflections on how it was to work with Torrance as an editor.
Wow.
So I don't know if you'll be able to follow through on that or not, but one plants these bugs in people's ears, and so that could be fun. So
Uh,
Ted, you've posted a quote there.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was just to the point that you were making before. This is from the prologue, and in my years as a designer, we would talk about analysis paralysis. In other words, you get so caught up in things you lose your ability to be creative. And
Yeah,
you can imagine if Einstein had gotten into that situation where he lost that sense of imagination and just got
yes.
hung up on some mathematical analysis, he never would have gotten past square one. let alone to equal E equals MC squared. So
That's right.
Where,
that's a
where's
really good point.
where's the quote? What
That's in the
page?
prologue. It's just below where you were reading from about the centipede. The first page of the prologue, about halfway down the first paragraph.
Yeah, he ends it distracted in a ditch for a very long time. I remember, yeah, it's the first paragraph.
I thought that was great. Distracted in a ditch.
For a very long time, yes. Well, your words analysis and paralysis, and then creativity, in a sense, is the backbone for this book. The nature of the very same tools, i.e., the tools of mathematics and theology, can either be creative and life-giving, or they can become analytical and paralyze people in a way that in many ways has become the tradition of our Western Christianity and even philosophy in the humanities. One could say that there's been a bit of a paralysis that's there,
yeah,
and stuck in certain ditches that are problematic. So this isn't Lessing's ugly ditch. That's another ditch, but we have all kinds of ditches to work with. Someday I have to do a work on people who use ditches as analogies for great philosophical ideas.
yeah, lots
Some
of
of them
ditches.
ugly, some not.
Hmm.
So anyway, this book here is really dealing with the whole question of how we come to have knowledge, the nature of what knowledge does in serving us, when knowledge becomes understanding. And so when we're doing understanding theologically, the phrases used of being paralyzed, many people, when they pick up a theology book, especially a Torrance book, they get a certain paralysis because there are so many words and modes of expression that are not natural to a modern Christian, even who hasn't read something at the level that Torrance has brought in. The people he refers to, the early church fathers and all that, um, Torrance can use them to refer to a world of thought, but somebody sees Athanasius and they go, "Who's he?"
Yeah.
And they're suddenly paralyzed because we don't have access to what's going on. So this book does not do a lot with the early church fathers. It's really dealing with Torrance's engagement with contemporary scientists and the nature of the tools that they provide for theological thinking to get it out of its own ditch, so to speak. The ditch metaphor is a helpful metaphor here. So, and then there is this whole question of the process of knowing the truth. So the question of what mathematics holds as the truth, what people generally hold as the truth, what theology holds as the truth. There is not a common understanding among all of those things, and that is part of the confusion where the analysis gets lost because there's not a shared language, and therefore there cannot be a shared understanding of what it is that might be talked about. And in many cases in the postmodern world, there is even a denial of truth other than your own truth, which others would say, well, that is untruth. If it's only a truth that you hold, you have no connection to any other person, and therefore the nature of truth itself has been lost. And again, the word truth, as Parker Palmer says, comes from proth, as in betrothed. So it's a way of being true to another person. To be betrothed is to pledge oneself in faithfulness to another person. So to say the truth when it's abstracted is, everybody knows this. This is just the truth, as though it's an abstract statement versus what it looks like for one person to be true to another. One is the world of the rational, and the other is the world of the relational. And so, in many ways, that'll be a theme that we carry through this book. And so, to say the nature of good mathematics, the nature of good science, the nature of good theology is that they're all going to live in the world that engages reality in relational kinds of ways and not live or stay in the world of thought. Though when one thinks well, it should help one in the world of relationships. So we don't want to throw them out, but we want to recognize that it's the dualistic problem. If you're all one or all the other, then you have a dualism and you're going to get stuck in one or the other. Either the world of pragmatics, the how, as J.B. Torrance would talk about, or the world of ideas, the Platonic conceptions, where a lot of paralysis happens. So This book is all about the nature of thinking and working at getting to the truth, and in many ways saying the modern Western world as we know it has lost touch with reality in pursuing truth because its form of truth is abstract truth and it is detached from the nature of what it is that we should be pursuing. So my nutshell statement, this book explores ideas of certainty and truth. There's a book called The Myth of Certainty. Whenever we think we're certain, implicit within being certain is I am the judge,
Oh,
right? So if I am certain, then it has been proved to me I am the one who has the credentials and ability to judge what is certain and what is not. And it collapses into Torrance's whole vision of Torrance and Barth that the human has become the measure and measurer of what is true, and therefore God at some level is just one to be measured. Can I prove God? Can I be certain about proving God? I can't, therefore God must not exist. Or at least I can't prove it, so I'm an agnostic. I don't think there's evidence for it, so I just don't think there's enough evidence, and I am the judge. So certainty has that built-in anthropocentric claim to it. Lessing Newbegin's book, Proper Confidence, acknowledges the problem of the word certainty and proposes the word confidence, confide, a way of being faithful with another person who is faithful to us. Con with fide, faith, a faith with another, which doesn't require a level of me being the judge. It's just that we have achieved a level of trust so that confidence is a word appropriate to say we will keep in the dynamic space of growing together, but we recognize who each other is. We recognize the claim that is said. It is a statement or a way of thinking we can work with and keep developing. And that opens up the whole, what Ted uses the word creative, and Polanyi uses heuristic, the ability to keep growing in our knowledge with a confidence that isn't closed, but has the capacity to expand. So that's just a beginning on the word certainty. The book, The Myth of Certainty, is one that I used as a textbook a number of years ago. And it's basically arguing these points that certainty has become a way of the modern thinker to attempt to claim an authority because they are certain of something that again assumes that they are able to be a judge. The question of what it is that we do when we have a human being, quote unquote, confess Jesus as Lord, they can truly be giving themselves up, or they can say, it makes sense to me enough that, I will follow it. You've argued the point of the existence of God and all these things enough that I will accept it. And it has this flavor of certainty that the human has become the judge. This is Torrance and Barth's concern with apologetics generally. Apologetics gives a person's reasons to believe, and they make the judgment in the end that it's reasonable to them, and therefore they make a choice based on that. But the sleight of hand piece in it is an argument for certainty. The human has become the judge, and God has simply been reduced to a point where the human says, I can accept that. But there's nothing of dying to self and living in the resurrected one that kind of goes along with that. So my students generally have a really hard time giving up apologetics because it's so much where they live with their friends trying to convince them of the reality of Christianity that they don't understand the nature of what it looks like to have the living person of Christ speak, and the scripture is the place where we go to hear that speaking and to be able to know the voice of the shepherd and all that. It is not the mode that the students that I've had, undergraduate and graduate, can quite comprehend. And evangelical Christianity has kind of defaulted to that. And Fuller Seminary, in its foundation, sent all of its professors to Harvard and Yale and all that to get degrees that showed that they had a rational kind of thinking that would put them on the same level with what were considered the Ivy League schools, the great schools. What they didn't see, and still I think have a hard time seeing, is that when to be rational is the foundation of what gives the credibility to your school, you've stepped into Puddefoot's argument that you end up with a lot of rational thinking that has lost the ability to think out of the nature and the person of Christ and the Trinity in a sense. And you end up with a Ray Anderson who's never granted tenure because he's working in a different mode from what it is that the rest of the school is working with, which is just kind of amazing. So certainty and truth. So in this book, truth will be something that we'll have to continually say. Truth as understood in theology, i.e. the person of Jesus who is the truth, versus truth as understood in mathematics or science generally, which is going to be attempting to aim at forms of truth where the human is able to prove truth. So even within the word truth, you can see the dichotomy of the dualism that Torrance is constantly wrestling with. So mathematics represents logic. And so the word logic, again, there's going to be theologic. And for Barton Torrance, theologic is that which is given in the revelation of God in Jesus, whereas mathematical and scientific logic is generally based on human observation, hypothesis, testing, things that prove to the human something. So even the word logic, we have to recognize multiple meanings or we'll miss the point. And the point that he's making quite often is that people have identified theology with emotions, and emotions are not trustworthy. Therefore, there can be no certainty. In fact, there can't even be any true knowledge because you can't prove it. And so that has put theology in a place where it's basically been assigned to another ditch, the ditch of those things to be discarded because it has no space within the contemporary worldview. Which again, he doesn't mention McMurray in here. McMurray was all over the place in here in terms of logic. One of the books that I'm hoping to write before I die is a comparison of McMurray and Polanyi and the way that Torrance used both of them. And the way that McMurray is often clearer than Polanyi in a lot of the points that are being made. Alan Torrance once said to me, try and write like McMurray. He is a master of clarity. And some people say, I've read him, but I understand it all. It can't be that profound. I can understand it. And so it's easy for people who are really clear in all that, for people to discount them simply because it doesn't stretch them because they're so effective as writers. And McMurray is often that kind of way. So there are a lot of ideas in this book that are going to be connected to that. I think McMurray is actually better than what Puddefoot or Polanyi did on the place of emotions in the development of the intellect, reason, and so forth. And again, Torrance is going to use McMurray right there in the beginning of Theological Science, chapter 1, in the first pages to talk about the role that McMurray plays in understanding what is reason. Both mathematics and theology require insight and wisdom to reach beyond formal statements to understand the world. So there's the bridge. This is the introduction of Torrance's commitment to a unitary vision of the world. So both theology and the mathematics have the capacity to be abstract insight-giving mechanisms, but they also both have the capacity to be wisdom that allows us to bridge through statements to engage and understand the world and how we live in it. Which it's not in the statement there, but that whole question of living in it is going to be a significant thing. So when people, say, I go to seminary, I get these theology books, it's all very interesting and all that, but the preaching classes, those are what really help me. In the counseling classes, those I can use. The theology classes, I might have an adult ed class on the Trinity or on, something on the Bible, but they generally don't have a sense of the bridge between, particularly a Trinitarian incarnational way of thinking and the way that founds the nature of what ministry looks like, which again, Ray Anderson's book's Foundations for Ministry is a book that specifically addresses that bridge. So to understand the world is necessarily to be involved in the world. If you understand the world but never get involved, we have to say that falls short of what understanding would look like. It's like saying, I understand marriage, I just don't want to be married. And if somebody says, I'm married, but I don't understand it, it's like, my friend, you have the truth. You were living in the truth. They can't all be grasped in understanding, but do you love your spouse? Well, yes, I do. Well, that's a good beginning of understanding. To love is to pursue what is the growing into the relationship in a way that we are called to do. So again, the context of this book, it was written in 1987. I am looking at actually doing a month with Carrie, studying the context of what was going on in the world at that time, but that's work that's yet ahead of me. There's a Mellon fellowship that is offered where they'll actually pay for you to come and put out proposals of what you want to look at. So to understand these 12 books is one of the things I want to do. Why did Torrance draw on these people? And Puddefoot here again is still alive, so he may be an interesting person to talk to about that. But here's somebody who is unique. The whole mathematical piece. Math was my worst subject in high school, and I took as little as possible in college because it was always abstract. So the very thing, in a sense, that Torrance and I think even Puddefoot are want to say is if you just think of mathematics as an abstract engagement with ideas that are connected to reality, it can lose any sense of enjoyment or delight that some people seem to have. There are some people who just love math, but I'm not one of those. But I can see where what he's saying here, that there are ways of thinking about math that could move in the right direction. So to say, I think that we don't understand math in many ways any better than we understand theology. We think of math as just 2 + 2 = 4, and one God in 3 persons is not good math. Therefore, it's confusing, and our math seems to maybe get in the way. So Todd, you've been throwing up a few things too. I didn't want to lose those. I eschew most apologetics, but not all. Remember, St. C.S. Lewis was an incorrigible apologist with evidently a profusion of good fruit in at least evangelism. So the one revision before we move to Lewis is that Karl Barth said, Jesus is the apologetic of God. If you want to know what is there about God to be known and to be proved, it's, God came and took on human flesh and walked among us. He is the apologia, the one who is the word of God alongside the very being of God who speaks to us in a way. C.S. Lewis was a great storyteller. I mean, he wasn't trained as a theologian as much as he was a literary master. And then his ability to write and write well, including the Chronicles of Narnia, the Space Trilogy, plus his Till We Have Faces and other books that are all, carefully written, insightful books to help the contemporary reader think. God in the Docks and other of his critiques of the contemporary world, again, all open doors, I think. And Mere Christianity, again, is for many people that is the book that they read that gives them a coming to Christianity. I have some problems with the book Mere Christianity. It appeals in the first chapter to the idea that everyone has a sense of good. They're not the same sense of good, but they have some sense of what is good. And there are things that are good, there are things that are not good. And the logic from that is that there must be a God who is behind that sense of goodness, even if we don't all agree on what it is that is good. It's a bit of an argument from natural theology. So anyway, I love C.S. Lewis, and I'd say the Chronicles of Narnia were what made a Christ. But it's the storytelling nature, it's the character of Christ that showed up in the Chronicles that for me did, in a sense, what I think Puddefoot is attempting to do in this book, and that is to see the bridges that are created. And Lewis was a great bridge builder. If he did anything well, it was to build those bridges and give you a way of seeing and hearing. So Todd also went to the website that talks about John Puddefoot. We created the EDSL to try to define a new kind of education that blends the very best traditions, which for him includes Christianity, and practices of East and West, and serves to facilitate a dynamic educational process that equips young people with all the best knowledge and wisdom from the past, while also enabling them to create a sustainable future. And so the word creative that Ted mentioned a little bit ago, that is the ability that I think is that taking the past, the wisdom of the past, and looking to what it is that could or needs to be done, which of course the great Sir Ken Robinson, who gave the TED Talk, Education is Making Us Dumb. He's making a similar argument that education tries to fit us into boxes that were created for the Industrial Revolution with bells and time schedules and all that prepared you to go into the workforce. But that what we need is education that allows us to learn to think creatively and strategically about how to deal with what it is that comes up in the course of life. So he's very oriented to breaking out of the boxes and learning to think strategically and creatively and heuristically, to use the word that Bill loves to use. And we can be heuristic about Bill's inquiry into that. But so Bryden throws up there for us the math, the invention of the square root of -1 sat there until, wow, engineers needed around the 1930s, many decades later. So yeah, math. So that's a wow comment, not a definition, but it's an invention. It's to recognize that there are things in math itself that one needs a heuristic attitude to keep discovering what it can allow us to see that you couldn't maybe see before. Right? So that would be an optimistic heuristic vision of math, that it doesn't just count, it opens the ability to see. So what's the link between mind that creates and the objective world? That's what this book is all about. And maybe the word affirmation in the title, logic and affirmation, is that one engages the world, logic is one thinks about the world, and then together we affirm that which can be said so that we live and act within the world. So I think his whole sense of recognizing field thinking in this book is going to be, again, that move to Einsteinian and Polanyian ways of thinking, building on what it is that Maxwell and others did, Einstein, and to see that all of these things are tools to make room for engaging as persons. And I'm thinking of Polanyi's all knowledge is personal knowledge. This book is clearly saying that, to be honest, we have to recognize that it's always persons involved, and so we need appropriate personal approaches to engage the aspects of humanity that we need to understand, and that in understanding them, we will be, using again Polanyi's term, we'll be making contact with reality. And so to say Polanyi and Torrance are both wanting to make contact with reality, Polanyi focused on the sciences, and Torrance took that and took it into theological science, the ground of his thought in his great work. God is there. By indwelling Scripture and the person of Christ, we come to know the depth of the reality of God, the God who made us and who is for us. And Wittgenstein, says Bryden, describe for me the aroma of coffee. So that's language. And if you, this is McMurray's statement saying, if you haven't acted in the world, which smelling is an act in the world, smelling in the world allows you then to reflectively think, oh, I've smelled that before. Where did I smell that? Oh, that was in the coffee aisle down at the grocery store. Ah, yes, but it requires action in the world to then have reflection, which we're calling logic or reason, to be able to use words that connect us to what it is we've experienced, and to be able to then talk to other people. You know that smell?
You know that smell?
I've smelled that before, and it smells like coffee. And another person may say, "Yeah, it especially smells like coffee with hazelnut and a bit of vanilla in it." Ah, you've gone beyond just straight coffee. You've got into the more deluxe kind of coffees. You can begin to discern other smells that are there. And Wittgenstein says it's impossible. Well, the word describe, I mean, we have to define what we mean by describe. If you have smelled something like something before, we will associate those things. So this is the whole call of Puddefoot and Polanyi, that you have to engage the reality of the world to reflectively then do the work of description. The description is not a primary work, it's a secondary work. And having tasted it once, if you've been to a restaurant and had octopus once, you may say, "I liked it last time. I'll try it again." Probably have a different recipe. But if you've never had octopus, you look at it and it may look scary to you. And so your non previous engagement will not build the bridge of saying, "I'd like to try or taste that." So the question of impossibility, the ability to describe, what is it? I think Polanyi's statement, it's to describe a picture with another picture. I think is similar to what is trying to be got at maybe by Wittgenstein. And Bryden's having technical difficulties today, so we can't get that cheerful voice to give all kinds of pushback on this, which would be fun.
Oh, I'd love to.
Oh, there you are. You're there. So a metaphor depicts the unfamiliar with the familiar. So another great philosopher, at least I know Colin Gunton says this: all language is metaphor. And yes, and that is true. With pictures, you cannot possibly picture in a picture what a picture pictures what is pictured.
That's it. Well done, Bill. You remember that quote?
Yes.
You're muted. Bill, you're muted.
He's giving all of his words on in the chat.
Yeah, I made a typo. You cannot possibly picture to picture how a picture pictures what it pictures.
Right.
Right? Is that?
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty
close.
Yeah.
Torrance
indeed, and of course that's the point with Torrance. That's the point with Wittgenstein. It's the point with Eberhard Jungel, with the whole metaphorical truth, which is his massive essay, fortunately translated by Webster. And I think what is interesting about this lovely man we're trying to read, and thank you for all those massive 38 pages, I found them quite fun.
Yes.
He's a lovely Etonian master, I have to quietly tell you.
And you know what that means, and I don't. So.
Oh, well, I schooled in UK.
Yes.
And Eton was founded by Henry VIII, and the school I went to was founded a few centuries earlier, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But you're right. Education is about thinking, and describing is about attempting to engage with the unfamiliar via the familiar.
Yes.
Because that's all we've got.
Yes.
The familiar is all we've got. And you speak about story. What story is doing is inviting us into another world via the motifs and memes and themes and whatever else that we think we're familiar with.
Yeah.
And it's a creative artist will drag us reluctantly into something that is literally indescribable, other than via this sci-fi stuff.
Right.
And I think that's the task which theology has today.
Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully we get dragged in joyfully, surprised by joy with Lewis on all that. But so
By marriage, yeah.
yeah, I mean, the word surprise is one of those things. Sometimes we weren't looking, things just show up on us, and we are confronted by that which was new, and we tried to understand it through some of what it is the rest of the book is trying to engage. But Dwayne, I see your hand up there. What is it you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, this is where again the whole issue of truth and mediation through the one.
Yeah.
That's what John McKenna was after, and I think that's the back of what Tom is after. That word logos for the idea, it's not a principle as in the idea of the Greek mind. When you read some of people commenting on John's theology, he's an experience of the one. Like he reduces, I touched and tasted eternal life, and you can have fellowship. He's talking about a whole different type of knowing that you can only experience through mediation. But this Aramaic word called memra, that's in the backdrop of a principle that we get logos from and affected John's thinking. Without the mediation of Christ, you can't know anything, and everything is made by, for, and through him. And that's what this whole inquiry of science is. This is what John was looking for in his interface. And that's what impressed, like, because McKenna was doing exactly what this series of books was trying to. He'd been thinking about this for so long and trying to interact with it and have something to experience. He was writing this book. Anybody he knew he was working on this book. He wanted to do this in honor of Tom, and he wrote a whole book. And then he told me he scrapped it. I never got to see it, but then he gave me the outline of his new work on interface. Like I can't remember the other theologian there, the Irish chap, the biography. But the guy that studied with, that Bryden studied with, I can't think of his name.
Alistair McGrath.
Alistair McGrath.
Yeah.
Alistair
See,
McGrath.
this idea of interface. Like John was so excited about this whole word interface, and like one of his chapters was called the sound of a diamond. I never heard an explanation of what that is, though.
Right. Well, we need a mediator for that.
Yeah, his wife doesn't know anything about it, so we'll have to go back to talk to him and talk to Jesus.
Right. Yeah. So good. So the word interface, at one level, you could say this book with logic and affirmation is attempting to find the appropriate interface that both mathematics and theology may find, but in many ways, the nature of how we've learned to think about knowledge and all that has largely broken the real world from our thoughts about the world apart in problematic kind of ways. The Kantian vision of the transcendental unity of apperception, that one comes with categories in the mind, perceives the world from that. That's all grounded in human categories, not from the world. The world is simply read through the lenses of the human. That, in many ways, is the break in the modern world, where our categories are not listening categories to what it is that reality has to tell us. And again, Torrance is going to, and Bart are constantly going to talk about the nature of the listening to God. So Jesus isn't just a human figure standing there. He's one who speaks. His revelation is not just in words. It's in the depth of who he is as one sent from the Father, one who will send the Spirit, who again is not just an objective being to be looked at in your presence, but does something deeply within us to bridge, to mediate a knowledge of the Father, so that when the Spirit moves, we cry out, Abba, Father. There is the nature of God bridging us into the reality of who God is. And I don't know how the Holy Spirit likes coffee or not, but sometimes it smells pretty heavenly when there's good coffee brewing. The crux of any bridging is a function of authority, of authorship source. So that's going to be one of the things that comes up in here. The concern that he brings with words like fundamentalism, that one has established an authority in oneself or in a human group that is not positioning itself heuristically or openly to engage reality outside of itself. And so the authority becomes a dam, in a sense, from really pursuing anything further. It's holding a body of water, but it's stopping up the flow of what it means to really know the nature of the world. So yeah, bridging, the word bridging, the word interface, these are all words that are helpful in the discussion here. They're not the words that he used necessarily, but I think they're all helpful to get at what it is that we'll be looking at. In the
if I can just pop in there,
please do.
He uses the words conversation and conversion, of course.
Yes,
and
he does.
That's the language which I think bridging is trying to also encompass.
Yeah.
Because what I get from him, and I don't have the book, I just have that lovely long printout of yours.
Yeah.
Is that when we encounter different forms of authority, we are being invited to consider a different frame of reference, a different paradigm, something that's unfamiliar, back to the metaphor business.
Yeah.
And I think what Jesus's parables were, and this is Jungel again, they were extended metaphors. And a metaphor is a compressed parable. A story is compresses into a metaphor.
Uh-huh.
And I think what he's doing with conversation, which is what this group is, and what conversion does, is you suddenly hear, oh, here's another source. Here's another authority. Here's another point of view. And it says, hey, have you tried this? And I think much of this book seems to me to be an invitation into that kind of dialectic, that kind of play.
Yeah.
And that is where I think he's quite useful.
Yeah. And the word play he overtly uses later in the book. So it is not just
yeah.
And again, using McMurray says, when a child is born, everything is entirely personal for them, but they have no words. But there is this other who, when they are not there, they cry. And when they are satisfied, they chuckle and coo and smile. And then they start learning to identify mama, dada, milk. And they start discerning the world using words to be able to name the things that they have interacted with. So the dynamic of the other as personal, that they come up with these identifiers, then allows for a secondary act, a reflection. Oh, that's mama, that's dada. Who are you? Stranger danger. I don't know you. You're scary. And so the child will react emotionally to that. So from that, McMurray says, all of our learning is emotional, and we learn to attach names with those different emotions. And we want the milk that's good and something that's hot. We know that it's not good, so we know to stay back because we've had something that burned us a little bit. But we emotionally learn to populate our words so that we can engage with them. And they, in that sense, they are, in Gutton's sense of the word, they are a metaphor. The word is serving a placeholder for an experience of getting or not getting or resisting something in the world, so that it really is about the interplay of how we will continue to grow and learn in the world. There comes a point where it's red wine or white wine. Well, is it a cab or is it a Chardonnay? What are you serving tonight? And we've learned to distinguish to the point that the name of whatever wine it is, we have this experience that allows us to make the bridge, the interface, the conversation leads us to imbibe with what we want. And some people may say, is it a $2 Chardonnay or a $20 Chardonnay? Well, it's a $5 one. Well, what about the cab? Oh, we got a nice cab. It's a $45 one. I'll have that. And again, this is all just the attuning through language of what it is that we want to engage and how it is that we attempt to use our thought world, which McMurray calls reflection, to inform our action, which always has reflection within it. So Todd says, since Mr. Puddefoot's book, PhD programs have sprung up in the philosophy of mathematics, and notes a few, inspired by the astounding applicability, efficacy, simplicity, and understanding and acting upon the natural world. E.g., math is foundational to the grounding grammar of biochem, optics, acoustics, mechanical engineering, etc. NASA's Apollo project was compellingly utilized by 7 remarkably brief engineering equations. Does Puddefoot's mention math is essentially discovered, not created by us, and the discovery seems almost too easy, like a setup job? He's going to suggest that discovery isn't as easy as you think, and that we need to discover together, that it's not always an individual discovers. The idea of standing on the shoulders of others is going to be part of what math does too. So the history of the philosophy of science has people who measure the movement of the stars. This was our first book, The Circles of God, right? And they got some things right and some things wrong. And so others later were able to use mathematics to trace the nature of what were planets, what were stars, what the moon was in relation to the Earth, and all that. So yeah, Pinot Noir from Otago, that's good. That's good. Are you thinking of Oyster Bay?
Oh no, that's not Otago, brother. No. Roaring Meg, for example. Roaring Meg or Akarua. There are countless ones that you maybe didn't have in your time. Sorry, brother.
Yeah, I left there in 1992. So the world.
Oh, no. Come back. We need you.
Yes. I've attempted to come back. I have been back twice, and I'm hoping to come back again. I'm hoping that somebody at Otago will bring me down for, Bart kind of conversations when my series is out and all that. Todd says mathematics was awaiting for a mathematician to arrive. I think that is very much aligned with what it is that he's saying in this book. There is an invitation for us not to give up or think we've arrived, but that there is this ongoing process of discovery that we're not, but by a long shot, not done yet. And maybe the crisis of what it is we're facing and the breakdown of the church will take us back to basic principles that say, how have we been doing church and helping people understand God in a way that's just not doing what the gospel even calls us to? And so waiting for people, and again, my conversation along with Torrance and Bart in this would say, we've been thinking about Christianity too rationally. We need to think about it much more relationally. But the word is generally not out there. And when people talk about relationship, it's usually rational rather than relational. So Ted says, the possibility of talking about God is eroded whenever the concept of God is blurred and clouded, diluted by various interest groups who wish to make it in some sense more palatable to themselves or to others. The means of preservation is undermined whenever the church falls back upon emphasis on formal expressions of belief, dogmas, without a corresponding non-formal spiritual revival, which I would call the relational and the personal.
Yeah, that's a quote from page 9 to the point you were making.
Yeah, it's a great quote, and it's very much part of the whole argument of the whole book in a sense. So I mean, it's a wonderful quote. And so again, just to capture his use of the words formal, theology when it's just dogma, and mathematics when it's just things that you do on a chalkboard in a classroom, those remain formal. The application of them, and this I think is Todd's point, can change the world. Mathematics can give you the ability to understand the nature of materials and the whole construction of all kinds of things that we needed mathematics to be able to build those things. So that is, the form is then applied. If you have all application but no thinking, then you're living in grass houses, right? I mean, it's so when you begin to be able to, you've got to go. Sorry, Tom, got to fly to
Auckland.
Auckland, okay. To trust the authority of multiple teams of good folks. Yes, we will trust they get you there. So this the whole question about the character of, as we sit here in 2023, how do we function both in churches as well as educational environments to recognize that most of our accreditors are those authorities that want to measure student achievement and ways that can be in some way captured with numbers and prove that a person has passed enough tests on the right things, but it doesn't mean they necessarily have wisdom. They may have knowledge without wisdom. And the nature of what is called bedside manner for a doctor may be missing. They may be very good technically, but not very good as a person who relates. And so it's hard to trust them. And the breakdown of trust, the trust relationship is a significant breakdown, especially in therapeutic kind of work. If you don't have trust as a therapist, you may know a ton, but the personal is required to be able to really do the work to get it done. So the idea of we don't want the church to be therapeutic based on therapeutic definitions of psychology and sociology, because those default to human desires for avoiding pain and gaining pleasure and dealing with the dysfunction of one's relatives. So it's all reactive to what goes wrong. There is a school called positive psychology that is trying to ask the question, what does it mean to be healthy? But as Torrance recognized, the world of all psychology still breaks things apart, so that the nature of any psychological evaluation looks at an individual with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Cognitive, emotive, behavioral therapies are all dealing with the individual and their actions, which is foundationally not dealing with field theory or the nature of the dynamics of what is between us. Family systems goes in that direction, but the diagnostic manual doesn't include family systems. Therefore, the insurance companies who measure what they will pay for based on the diagnostic manual don't affirm.
No code for that, right?
No pay.
No.
So again, there's a philosophical breakdown that is keeping what would be the wisdom of what is presented in the book here to bring theological insight of who God is, to see the world as a whole, our communities in the wholeness, the way we interact with the context in which we live. All of these things should be in the conversation. And again, conversation, as Bryden noted it, of learning to think in such a way that we more appropriately live in light of who God is and who we are as God's people in the places God has us. Which one could argue that's what the letters of the New Testament are doing. One could even argue that's what the prophets in the Old Testament are doing. How does one not go in the directions that are destroying our lives, but to live with fidelity to the God who's been faithful to us? So all that to say is I can see where it is that Puddefoot is pointing. I have not seen very many people who've caught it, and the fact that Torrance is as unknown as he is, as is Bart really, as great as Bart is, there's a lot of people who don't know, and they think of him as just a theologian, not as somebody who really is informing the nature of the scientific work of bringing the life and wisdom of God as one alive to the communities in which we exist. So just to note briefly, there is a prologue. In the book itself, none of the chapters are numbered, so I put chapter numbers, but the books themselves don't have chapter numbers. And within each of the chapters, you can see that I used A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so forth. Again, those are headings that I took from the book, but the book itself doesn't have the letters that correspond with them. So it's for the purpose of our conversation that the numbers and letters are there. The book is written in a sense as a large essay, attempting to have a continuity of thought in a sense. And with each of these, I attempted to give kind of the gist of what that section was dealing with. And most of these labeled subsections within a chapter, they're all cap kinds of titles for the subsection. So I mean, they're clearly a significant kind of thing. I mean, when somebody does a lowercase italic versus an uppercase all caps, there's a sense of the importance of the structure that I think that is showing up, that is implied by the nature of how one puts those labels in there. So to say it's a highly organized book, but he didn't choose to use the math, no numbers, no chapters, no sub chapters. So anyway, they're just interesting kind of things that one would not do that. In the prologue, he talks about the replacement centers that, in a sense, forms the cultural shift that is implicit in what he's dealing with in the book. So he wants to move from authoritative to something, or he wants to be authoritative without being authoritarian. Right? And the authoritarian, that's the logic structured something that's becomes walled. Biblical without being fundamentalist. And the question of authority is certainly within that. So we come listening to the Bible without holding a certain set of fundamentals that become walls instead of bridges. Sacramental without being sacramentalist. And so in the one case, one ends up worshiping the sacraments instead of indwelling the sacraments to know and participate in the life of the living God. Distinctive without being irrelevant, which, Ted, your comment just a moment ago, I often say the attempt to be relevant is the collapse into natural theology in the modern world. Whenever you kind of say, what do the people want? You've just defined that whatever they want or think they need is going to determine what you say or do, the programs, the sermons. You have defaulted to the human desire, and you've lost the ability to really think theologically at that point. So this issue of distinctive without being irrelevant, it means we want to be relevant, but distinctively Christian, meaning letting God speak as the first voice. And that we then get to be in the conversation that responds to that. Clear without being dogmatic. And again, for most people, dogmatic means a rigid opinion. And clear means a statement of what I know so far so we can keep learning together. Right? And there are a lot of theologians which clarity is not necessarily their strong point, especially when there are 4 or 5 lines to a single sentence to follow what it is that's going on. Firm without being rigid, which is interesting. Firm without being rigid. What do you think that means?
Flexible by definition.
Flexible, and yet you believe something and you're firm in it, but you have the capacity to be flexible. I think that what you're saying is true. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall bend and not be broken.
Well, you know what the philosophy of football is? When you're playing a better team, you want to be bend but not break. And if you break, that means you got scored on. That right. And lots of, but that's the test of the truth. Whatever amount of force is put to it, it should not be able to crush it or change it or distort it in such a way that it could smash it to oblivion, because it's true, and it will stand and it will stay. And no matter what assaults it, it'll bend, but it won't break.
Right.
Even if it takes time to develop the language. That's why the Trinitarian teaching, once you know the teaching and participate in it, it's not an abstraction. It never changes in such a way that you built your house on a rock, and no matter what comes, the storm cannot crush it, and nothing, because Jesus isn't dead. He's our contemporary, so he's always alive to defend himself, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, good. So the idea of loyalty to your team, you're committed to your team, but you're not so rigid that everybody has to play the exact same place or way every week. Or in marriage, I'm firm in my marriage, but I'm flexible as to what we do together, would be a sense of bringing in the humanity of what it means to be in a relationship. So again, there is a kind of a humanizing dimension that's here without collapsing into the human, right? The human is appropriately addressed without being the one who forms the basis of what is done. So what we believe, not what we doubt or don't believe, which is the modern what is it called? The philosophy of skepticism, Nietzsche and company. So this whole idea of he wants to recenter how we think and to not collapse into these rigid, what become irrelevant ways of functioning and thinking. Which I don't know how it is in the part of the country you are, but here the universities are strongly going to the STEM, science, technology, maths, and the humanities are being abandoned because one, they don't seem to make enough money. Two, people just seem to think that it's irrelevant anymore to need to really pursue the things that the humanities want to give to us. And so to just ask the question, what is it that we're losing in having a major component of our universities lost in terms of the educational wisdom that they would hopefully bring, so that the people who come out are wise in the skills that they get, but also wise in what it means to be participants in the communities and relationships that they're going to go out and be part of. Which again, I still think that starting in kindergarten, there should be reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's, but the 4th R is relationships. Kids should begin to just say, do you know your name? Do you know the names of these others? How do you feel about yourself? Do you like yourself? How do you feel about these other people? Do you know what fear looks like? Do you know what joy looks like? Just learning the language of emotions and identity, and to begin to recognize, you are who you are because of your family, and you will become something this year in classroom because of the other students that are here. So we're going to nurture what it means to grow in relationships. But when do you get your classes on relationships in your education?
You don't.
You don't. That's exactly right.
Unless you take it tangentially in university to, and even to me, the madness of psychology is the history stuff that you got to go through. It's totally nonsensical. A lot of the stuff you're talking about, family systems, it even help with personality. You got to start somewhere, because it gives you some terminology to put yourself in a box somewhat, or at least identify areas that you can work with. And then it's, again, it's analogy. It's not absolute, but that's where people have to start from. And there is nothing there, because it's not a priority.
Yeah.
Because if you're a thing, because everything's been rectified, it's been thingified. So that's the reason why all this other stuff is falling apart. We're the victim of the God that cannot see, hear, or speak or do anything, and it's crushing us systematically and very efficiently.
Yep. No, thingifying is a great word, and to say that even as humans, we've been made individuals in a thingified kind of way is a very appropriate kind of assessment, and the breakdown of what is lost with that. I took one class in my associate degree on personal relationships, but it was an elective, as you say. Not everybody got that. And then through a degree on youth ministry, a Bachelor of Theology, and then 2 master's degrees. It wasn't really until I met J.B. Torrance that I began to get definitely a theological, but even a really good psychological understanding of what it might mean to be persons. It was just a very difficult journey to learn the kind of things that Torrance has in onto-relational thinking and all that, which again, I think JB was actually even better than TF in terms of the personal. But anyway, JB spent more time with John McMurray. He learned a lot about the nature of persons from McMurray that TF got it, but JB got it better. So anyway, the second thing in here, the distinction between liberal and conservative, the liberal questioning without belief, better to question than believe everything. It unsettles one around having confidence. So one ends up questioning everything, questioning God, questioning authority, all that. And so to say his identification here, not all liberals are necessarily this, but you can see that when one thinks that questioning is the most important thing, that one ends up having very little confidence or trust in anyone, especially God. Conservative, beliefs without questioning. Better to believe something, then question everything. And so you can see that in the world today, we have a lot of people that go with that too. And so it is easy to believe things that are unquestioned. And in countries like Germany, Nazi Germany, propaganda led people to believe things without questioning because they were told you just need to go along with it. Modern day Russia, I think, has a lot of the similar things. The people who are in power just, you need to believe that we are Russia and we are doing the right thing, and go along with our leaders, and questioning is not allowed. So to just recognize that these are two polar opposites at some level, that Puddefoot.
Actually, Marty, you're missing
Yes.
something there about our own culture.
Well,
The simple monstrous thought that there's no such thing as truth. And then so it fabricates to my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth. And there's no absolute. And so none of us can be wrong. And that's totally anti-mathematical, mathematical where the nonsense of 2 + 2 is 5. If you can't accept that new reality, you're racist. I don't know how they make that jump in logic. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that is questioning everything other than myself, right? I mean, that position of I have my truth and you have your truth, that is questioning everyone else's truth, but I will live with my own truth, right? So you're right. It definitely plays into that. And you can see all of it basically leads to a fracturing of the world. And
Well, it
again,
gets smaller and smaller because you're getting more and more. It's not just narcissism, but like the joke about the solipsist. I don't know if Alan Torrance told you about that joke about that when he did meet a solipsist.
you can tell it to us.
He was visiting some university and he was so excited because the leader of the academia was a solipsist, and he was joking with one of his colleague that was showing around university, and they were all like everybody at the in the university was concerned about him, but the joke was, we're concerned about him because if he goes, we all go.
Right.
Everyone's just a reflection of his own thoughts, and it's not real. He's the only thing that's real. Are you crazy?
Yes. Okay. So I'm just looking at the chapter titles, just to get a sense of the flow of the book. So chapter 1, Inheriting Doubt. So that's the problem of the modern world, that doubt has become the dominant motif. I am the judge and I doubt everything that anyone else claims. Chapter 2, Reconsidering Proof. This is the nature of the human being trying to think about, how do I get what is true? And so he's trying to rethink through what it is that might be considered in that process. Chapter 3, Reintegrating Reason. And integrating there is reintegrating, I think, is similar, Dwayne, to your word interface. Is there, it's the bringing back together, and conversation, as was put out there by Brighton before he left, is going to be, again, part of that. So it's bringing together something that has been fractured apart. And in a sense, it is very similar to Torrance's addressing the nature of dualism and the fracturing apart there. So reintegrating reason is part of that. Chapter 4, Realizing Truth. So this is discussion on what truth looks like when it's appropriately been brought, where there's an alignment between the nature of reality and the nature of our thoughts about reality, such that it is integrated together, and we are whole beings in a whole world, and our thoughts allow us to live in the nature of what that calls us into, in a journey of continuing to grow and learn within that. And then chapter 5, Living Understanding. So the whole nature of understanding is it goes beyond merely rational thoughts. To really understand, you have to get to the point where there is an engagement. Polanyi's word indwelling is more a sense of understanding, to where when you really understand something, you're able to live in the light of what it is that is there in the real world, so that you don't have this separated sense of the formal abstract world and then the lived world that is out there. And then there is an epilogue that is, in some senses, a call to having education that is a more personal form of what education might look like. So anyway, you can get right up front here kind of the flow of the book, problem, steps forward in looking at the whole sense of how thought engages reality. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to deal with every point, but at least we'll try and hit some of the main sense of the flow of the chapters. Now, chapter 1 is the chapter that everybody was able to read if you got a chance to. So I'll spend a little more time just saying, was there anything here that stood out to you? It's basically his assessment of the problem and the problem of what doubt does. Nobody's jumping at anything here, which is okay.
Well, as a reflection there, sometimes doubt is the positive thing, because even himself, to address doubt, he's doubting that the doubters and their doubting is a proper methodology to do anything that's beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is the phrase question authority can have value, and that's part of what the Inquisition and then pushing back against the Inquisition. I mean, there are pushbacks and pushbacks against pushbacks, and the Reformation, when it comes, is a doubting of the authority of the Roman Catholic Church to appropriately be representatives of what it is that Christianity is all about.
But that's necessary, though. That's the irony, is that and that's where we're talking about. Could it, one person, Jesus, namely, he changed everything, and that if we're waiting in the church for one person to change everything, there's different cases in point where that's actually happened because of Reformation, because of rediscovery, and it wasn't so much that there was a need to tear everything down and build it back up again, reconstructions or deconstruction. They didn't realize where those ideas were going, that they were living and had their own way of getting closer to the center of the truth.
Yeah.
And that's why that whole idea of being open to reality and being open to improvement, or, because the idea, just the whole idea of change, there's only two ways to change. Either you improve what you already know, which we're always constantly doing, but then there's the other one where you have, if something is wrong, you totally have to leave that foundation and have a new paradigm shift, like Thomas Kuhn, and we're sort of stuck in between, because we can't really improve where we're at right now, because we're saying that the modern foundations of perceiving and ordering the knowledge that they perceive from experience is based on wrong values and wrong understanding of the purpose and reality, and lacking a relationship with the living God to actually allow you, like Adam, to name things appropriately. We're confused, eh?
So I think that the level of what this chapter is dealing with, I would call systemic doubt, not merely the doubts that one has about certain things along the way. So to say, when you have an authoritarian structure, either in a church or a culture or a country, where you can't even ask questions, then there is a fear of speaking of it all. If your whole life is about the fear of failure, you will have stage fright. You will not be able to really show up, and change just doesn't become possible at all. Where I think, as you pointed out, change is necessary for growth. There are a lot of people today who just say, yeah, I'm just too afraid to try going in that direction. I'll stay in the job, I'll stay in the relationship I am. I know it's not perfect, but I'm just afraid of changing. And so that's a doubt in the ability of seeing a better life that is there. So the fear of failure, which in a performance-based culture, the fear of failing means many people won't try things because they're afraid of it failing. The idea of becoming a Christian, the fear of people laughing at them for becoming a Christian, or the fear of I won't be a good enough Christian, all of those things are part of the doubt they're more systemic, and they lock people into cages. So he's suggesting that starting with Descartes' doubt, I'm going to doubt everything I know and just start with what I know for sure. Well, I'm thinking, so I think, therefore I am. That was a beginning that doubted everything, and so it's a huge setting aside of all the wisdom of the past and to try and get a new foundation to build everything on. And what it builds on is my perception of myself. And so to say Western culture from Descartes forward has this inclination towards what Luther called incurvatus in se, the curve into oneself. that the nature of everything is, does it please me? Does it satisfy me? It becomes a me-centered kind of culture. And so the nature of thinking then all gets locked up in the cul-de-sac of one's own mind, in a sense. And one can live their whole life in their head and not really live in relationships. Even sitting in a room with somebody, they may have zero vulnerability, an inability to have conversation, any of those things, because they're so either afraid of others or just want to live by themselves in their head. And it seems as though that might not be the case. It's interesting moving into a new neighborhood. We have invited most of the neighbors over for a meal or for drinks on the patio out on the back deck or something. We've only gotten one of all of them who's actually invited us back, and none of them have, kind of taken an initiating invitation to the neighborhood. Everybody is kind of locked in their own world, and they don't think, oh, we have a new neighbor. We should, make them feel at home, make them feel comfortable. When I went to New Zealand back in 1990, I went to quite a number of people's houses or had people over, all by my initiation. And Alan Torrance said, what are you doing? We should be inviting you. And I said, it may be that you should be inviting me, but nobody's doing it. So I'm doing it. So there is something that is keeping us more and more apart. I think, not sure about the opinions of the others about politics or religion or finances or who knows what it is, but there are all kinds of things that say, I'm not sure if this is going to go well. I think I'd rather stay home or stay to myself, keep my opinions to myself. And so that is it. That's a culture of doubt and fear. And I think that's his foundational point, that once you go to that place, you have the ability to have all kinds of formal thoughts in your head, opinions about what you think is the nature of the case, but it becomes what he calls in B, the obstruction of humanity, the dilemma of individualism, a mistrust of social practice. Our social practices begin to break down. The concern for self outweighs the concern for others and what it means to participate in that. And so C, the whole nature of culture and nurture and choice, it all becomes limited to what is possible as defined by the culture. Some people call this peer pressure. It's also keeping up with the Joneses. What do you call that phenomenon where you're trying to keep up with the neighbors? You want to have as nice a car and as nice a yard. Is there a name for that?
We call it keeping up with the Joneses here.
Keeping up with the Joneses. Okay, well, we'll just call it keeping up with the Joneses.
That's old fashioned because we have too many other ethnicities, so it's not really appropriate to just blame the Joneses.
We can't even keep our phrase keeping up with the reality. We're still stuck with the old cultural definition of the Joneses. But so that idea of what is possible by the culture and that it's something that is generally seen as known, that's a fear-based, controlling, dominant cultural motif that keeps us isolated by ourselves. And so D, the symptoms and sources of change, there is a general rise of dissatisfaction as people wish they could change, but they feel trapped. And so they pursue ways of separating, finding people maybe who are like them, the cliques that they may identify with in their church, maybe their clique, and they're afraid of other churches, not to mention the people who aren't in churches. The idea of having communities of inquiry, this is a very Polanyian concept, conviviality in a community of scientists. The question, what would it look like to have communities that ask questions together? And that would be theologically as well as beyond that, to engage the world and other persons. So, Bill, you're going to read for us page 21. I am grateful to T.F. Torrance for
drawing our attention to the thought of James Clerk Maxwell.
Yes.
In this context, regarding concerning the desirability of a sense of embodiment in mathematics. Maxwell's researches into the electromagnetic field forced upon him an awareness of the trade-off between generality and specificity.
Specificity.
Specificity,
yes.
You see, in mathematics, that in disembodying mathematics by abstraction, we lose our purchase upon concrete particular situation. So,
yes,
I'm not sure. That's under the formalism topic.
Which is H.
Page 21.
Yeah, so that's still coming a bit, but you already have this idea with Maxwell and field concept of the embodiment. It's why I like geometry better than algebra. Geometry has real time-space interaction. You're looking at real triangles and angles and the nature of their interrelationship. For me, it's so much easier than just equations on the board with symbols that represent abstractions, not even necessarily actualities, and you're trying to solve for X and things like that. But the nature of Maxwell is it's like, this is about the real world. There are fields in the world. There's electricity. You can't see it. And the nature of beginning to see fields of what is in the world, the dynamics that are there, that moves us into a sense where our symbols, our math and all that has a referent that we can then talk about, what is a field of energy? What is a field of light? What is the nature of the speed of light within a field? We're talking about real life things. That's the embodiment piece. Maxwell took that which was formal and abstract and said, this has to deal with what is actually going on in the world. And especially with things that we can't even see, but they are at work, which the obvious theological implications of that are huge. I can't see the Spirit blows where he may, and we see the impact of that, but he moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to behold. So there's real world, the relationship of the triune God, and we move within it. So Maxwell and the embodiment of field thinking begin to see holes and to see within the holes ways that we penetrate into them, stratas of thinking, that within any given field there may be more than just meets the eye.
So is this the quid sit? Quid sit?
Yeah, that's Latin. I don't know quid sit.
Well, jumping ahead just a tad, it sounds like it. I mean, are you talking about the Cataphysine? Are you?
About what?
Cataphysine?
Talking about Cataphysine.
According to the nature.
Oh, Puddefoot.
Physine.
The nature of something being known according to its nature, the exploration of it, is that the formal statements that we make are based on the nature of reality, i.e. field theory for Maxwell, and not merely on concepts in the head, which would be, the whole empirical, I can only what I can see and touch is what I will deem as scientific, which my dad was that kind of a scientist. But to say that Katafusin is that there is more than meets the eye, and I need to indwell the field to understand all the dynamics of what's going on. So Einstein's exercises with light and the bending of light around planets, and to be able to capture that with photographs and all that was all part of an embodiment of what light even looks like, in such a way that he's able to explore the field of light as it functions around other bodies and to begin to explain the nature of gravity in its field context as well. All of these are embodying concepts that we had only just said, gravity is a force, it's just a force. Get used to it. It's like, no, there's probably more here. So the fact that we felt gravity didn't mean we understood gravity. And the fact that we knew that light was there didn't mean we understood light. So the the work of Maxwell and Einstein is they begin to bring together energy equals mass times the velocity of light squared. There's a relationship that is stated in that to begin to understand the nature of light, of mass, the relationship that they bear that allowed them to go and unpack in some tragic ways in the atomic bomb, but unpack the nature of reality because its relationality was seen.
According to the nature of it, yes.
According to the nature of it, that's right. It was a better understanding of the nature so that we could have an improved and different understanding of the nature. Family systems therapy is a field-based thinking. So a family is an emotional unit. If one person in it creates fear, everyone else is afraid. You may look at a person and say, boy, do they have problems. And they're often called the identified patient. But a good therapist will say, this person is really acting out and being disruptive and everything. Let's look at the field of people around them and the influence that these other people are having on them. And they often find there's a dominant, fear-based kind of person that this person's responding to, a compliant one who rescues them and so it encourages them to go on. But it's all field theory embodying the nature of what we would have just taken the one. They are a problem. They have bad behaviors. They must be thinking wrong or whatever, and place them in the Puddefoot inquiry. What is the nature of this person in their context, in the field in which they live? Look at this. These people have these influences, and the reason they are the way they are is because we now see them, Puddefoot, in the field of relationships in which they exist. So the whole nature of field thinking and embodiment is that we don't doubt that there's more, partly this inheriting doubt. The nature of my dad's sense, I can't believe in a God who I can't see. I only believe what is empirically available to me. So that the doubt about God's existence was outweighed by his confidence that his senses could give him something true. And he loved to do experiments with electricity and stuff with kids, and he loved electricity and water and things like that. But it was because of the touchability of it all that it felt like science that was right in front of you. You can touch it and taste it and feel it. God was just too much distant. And he'd go to a funeral and hear the prayers, and he said things like, they might as well be saying the Jabberwocky. That was the Carol poem. It just makes no sense to me. And the level of his doubt that prayers for the dead could do anything meaningful, either for the dead or for God or for anybody else standing there, was just inconceivable for him. The doubt had so consumed his quote unquote scientific thinking, which I would call a form of scientism. So when you grow up in a world where people doubt anything they can't see and they can't see God, then God is initially, inevitably off the menu. Todd says, what I like about C.S. Lewis and what I see as valid apologetics, C.S. Lewis listened to people's real questions they already had as a loving service to seekers and outsiders, the fold, including agnostics and materialists who religiously attended the Socratic Club. He helped doubters doubt their doubts. Yeah, and I think that's fine. Lewis was not a systemic doubter. He was dealing with people who were systemic doubters. And the nature of Lewis is he does have this vision of a real Jesus and a real God who is there, who is the ultimate one who overcomes the doubts. So always winter, but not quite Christmas until Aslan comes. It is the coming of Aslan that overcomes the doubt of the doubters in Narnia, and the people are set free. So C.S. Lewis, he understood the nature of doubt and the nature of something that was beyond that doubt. His statement, I knew there were many myths, but in Christianity, I found the true myth, right? Which is to acknowledge that there is a story dimension to it, there is an embodiment dimension to it. And because it's a story, it's not right here and now, but it is the context reality within which we live. And at some level, it overcomes these other stories that try and tell us other things that aren't true, which he wrote a number of things, like God in the Dock, about the state of the modern human and rationality, the way that it was kind of losing rationality. And the Space Trilogy, in a sense, was a fracturing of humanity, the bent ones, which in the final one, that hideous strength, it takes place in a university context with people whose thought world, in a sense, has become this thing to be overcome. It's hideous because it stands against God at some level, but the outworking of humanity's attempts to grasp power and authority becomes, the ultimate loss of connection with the power of God, grasping for the human, and hideous is the word that Lewis uses for it. So, did you want to say anything more about that, Todd?
Yeah, thanks. I guess what is hideous, so to speak, about a lot of apologetics is that I think people become attached to building their own case in their own little, within their own little cranium, and then explicating it and defending it. And what I liked about Lewis is that he is very aware of the communities he's in Cambridge and Oxford, and to individuals that he is in conversation with. And he's, I think his, I'm not, I hope I'm not sort of hero worshiping here too much, but he seems essentially other centered in his apologetic, and that he's going, what is your real question, Marty? Let's talk about it. And then he comes up, and I think the Space Trilogy and Narnia he is very much an evangelist's heart, and part of his evangelist's heart is kicking down thoughts that raise themselves up against Christ. And
yeah. No, I would agree with that. I would agree he's an evangelist, and I would agree that story is, in a sense, you could call it a form of apology. I would call it a form of invitation rather than apology. And there are the moments where Puddleglum puts his foot into the fire and says, if this is the best you could do in this world, I'll take the fake world up there. I've seen Aslan, I've seen trees, I've seen the sun, and if that's fake, I'll take the fake because it's way better than your quote unquote reality. Well, that's an apologetic moment in a sense, right? He is casting doubt on what is being called real and saying, I've seen something that's more real than this, and even if it was a dream, I'd still go with that. So there is a convincing in that moment, in a sense, and an unveiling of that little man behind the curtain. That's a Wizard of Oz kind of parallel there. That says Lewis wants to get us to the truth, right? He invites us there, and his stories do that for us. So the nature of this book is it's also inviting us to the truth, and the quote unquote little man behind the curtain, or the green lady of Kirtle, is the educational system of the world that has told us that thinking about everything appropriately, having all the answers in our head based on our questions, is the best we can do. And he's just saying, no, you're living in a world in your heads that's not engaging the reality, what it means to be persons who live and relate, who live as communities, who grow and understand the world. You've limited it by your questions are as big as the world is, and you're not actually dealing with the world as it is. Dwayne, I see that hand.
Well, just getting back to what we're at, some of your discussion, the nature of language, because it's not a direct correspondence, just like last week with Mike, I'm only talking an analogy. Like, that's the nature of story. It's an analogous way of continuity where, and Jesus' ministry is totally different. Israel's a story, and they gathered their anamnesis and getting, they were really good at putting themselves in the story when they're telling the Passover, but then they're still really good at it. But the story moved on, and the story was left to hidden mystery. Oh, for the gateway was belief in order to and this one person actually having the audacity to say, that I am the way, the life, and the truth, and whoever comes to me, like, it's such a radical thing. And then as you test and inquire of this one from experience, it's really interesting the way God has a way to convey this stuff, because Dr. Houston used to quote, I can't talk about like as if he's not here, but just from his class about 5-6 years ago, he was quoting Kierkegaard, and he was talking about the ridiculousness of the philosopher, and there's a sign out front of this place that says "Truth for Sale," and the point of that is, it's not that that the sign's indicating it's truth. It could say vacancy, it could say help wanted, it could say whatever, but there's no correlation to what the sign says and what the philosopher actually offers, because they don't know what the truth is. And then how do you know what the truth is once you find it? And Kierkegaard's asking that question, like, how you don't go on a search for the truth finds you.
Yeah.
And that's the most difficult thing for human beings to accept, because it's a personal experience that sets you on a journey that is particularized and can have some correspondence to other people, gathering in a church fellowship or whatever, but still you're dealing with the one who's the maker of everything.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, the whole nature of all philosophical enterprises that take us in places away from really engaging the truth, lived reality, all that are going to be problematic. And the philosopher, in a sense, is implicit in this whole first chapter. Philosophy, by definition, is the human search for wisdom and not God. I mean, that's the difference between philosophy and theology, is one begins with God and understands God and God's self. Though some people make their theology into a philosophy, human thoughts about God. But again, that's problematic too. And in this book, he calls that basically religion. Religion is the human creation of something to worship a God at some level. So again, the whole nature of this first chapter, with formalism, with axioms and dogmatics, with scientism, they're all forms of human attempts to achieve something of knowledge and power that serves the human and particularly affirms the individual and erodes the nature of our contact with other humans and reality itself. So the formal is not transparent. It doesn't allow us to see what's real there. People like Polanyi with indwelling languages to enter into what it is that the words and ideas we're using are pointing to, so that it helps us to see, to engage, to enter into reality in a way that is helpful. So the point M, facts and creativity, we are engaged in interpreting the world. I mean, all of this book is about interpreting the world, and language is a system of interpreting. So learning needs to bring new insights to the place we live, to be creative and to solve problems so that we continually grow in relationship with one another, moving towards a hopeful future. And his point that science largely studies the past, so we can't think about the nature of the way that we know and how it helps us to shape a thriving future that is for the good of humanity. Something that he says is needed for in the synthesis of theological and human sciences, which again, that's a lot of my work there. And cheap repentance, needing engagement with reality, we have to go back to the source. If we just keep changing our minds about what we already know, just adjusting a little bit, and don't go back to the source, then we're not really repenting and letting Puddefoot, reality, really shape our thinking. The second chapter, again, on proofs, the whole nature of proof is that ultimately there is this human desire to make the human the one who is structuring the questions, the nature of the arguments and everything. So he has, different types of proofs and the nature of how those proofs function to try and get at reality. But for the most part, they easily become tools for the human to affirm the human and not to get to God. In his point D on post-critical philosophy, this is where he really begins to move into Polanyi on the question of what is truth and how does one enter into really being transformed or converted by reality and not just by an argument. Because when argument converting just leaves you still separated from reality. So post-critical is in theological thinking, it's when the person of Jesus shows up, meets us, claims us as his own, and we say, "I'm with you." There is a post-critical. The critical is the human standing aside and judging reality, and post-critical is letting reality begin to inform our thinking. We're still thinkers. We're still engaged. We're just not standing back as the judges over it. As critical theology philosophy coming from Immanuel Kant came. Point F, the conversation is the word that Bryden focused in on. We must dwell within a conversation so it becomes transparent. Discernment is seeing meaning to disclose the truth being disclosed. So conversation is that way of con with verso, life. The word verso, conversation is the sharing of life. The passage in Peter, let your conversation be acceptable. People think that it's just talking. It's really the whole sharing of life that is implied there in the original sense of what it is that's going on. So this way into a scientific future where we share life, we learn, truth is disclosed, we will be converted in that process as we appreciate and understand within the whole. Language just provides the bridges, the tools, the interface for Dwayne, the interface with the world so that we become adapted, attuned to it and to one another in conversation. As a marriage therapist, I can say most people have a hard time, even with their spouse, being clear and having good communication about what they're wanting and how to work together doing things. It's amazing how much of a challenge that is for people. So the whole nature then of mathematics, it's another tool that one can use to measure, the size of things you need or the number of things you need for recipes and for building buildings. It is a constant help in so much of the things that we use to structure life. In education, how many classes do you need to take for this? What are the testing? What percentage of accuracy do you have to have? This is all mathematics applied to the measuring of the world, which again, measuring is something we do. So the question, how if we decide what we're going to measure, are we measuring even the right things? Are we questioning our question? Is what we decide to question about them right? So the question, is your church growing? Well, we have more people showing up in the pews. They're giving more money. It's like, oh, your church is growing. It's like, well, actually, they're all using it as a tax write-off, and they're showing it to see their buddies and have drinks afterwards. But, so to say, what if we counted the conversations that people had? What if we looked at the collaborations they decided to do together to serve other people? If we counted these to say, we've got 50 people and every week they're out serving the community. They've done it 15 times this week. They have provided food and resources for 150 people. There's a sense of appliedness in what it is that's going on, that math is judging, but it's about something that's deeper than that. Math is being used as a tool of meaning and not as an abstract that keeps us from really engaging reality. So in chapter 3, the nature of reintegrating reason, abandoning the center, which is ourselves, using the scientific method, and finding our center in the other. So this is the transition that Puddefoot is looking for, is that we have a shift in our thinking. It's singing in a new key. The old key is for the self, the individual. The new key is for the other, losing yourself to find the other. The reformation of reason itself. And katafusen I think is an appropriate word to put there. The theological imperative, reason begins in the other, the God who is personal, the knower and the known in a relationship. So here he really is starting to kick into the theological dimension of what it means to be those who think and engage. That self-centered reason with a bunch of prior assumptions is only going to lead us back to ourselves. Whereas if we can have other-centered reason, the triune God, where the Father knows the Son, loves the Son, and all that, it opens us up to a constant living in the dynamic of the world as it is, and our reasoning at some level is shaped and transformed in the process, which we could call that metanoia, the change of our mind because of reality. So the old world is a self-centered world. We could call that sin. So to say the world is largely lost in the darkness of not being able to see because their eyes are focused inwardly and they can't see God or the neighbor. Dominated by the fear of being wrong, incapable of trust, and prone to prejudice. When we come with assumptions, even about the questions that should be asked or who is acceptable, all of those are prejudgments that are the very grounding of prejudice. An individualist culture will almost necessarily be prejudiced because everyone's values will look out for themselves and people who are like them and not trust other people who think, act, or look differently. So you've got built-in prejudices and built in the very structure of it. So the nature of measurement that he has in F, numerical equivalence for experience to give secure confidence. Do I have enough or the right amount? So there's an emotional dimension to measurement. We measure things because we want to make sure we have enough or the right amount. Are we counting the right things, or is what is important countable? Do we need to rethink even what is important, and maybe what is important isn't countable, like love may not be countable. Man must measure, he says, but how accurate can we be in our measuring? We become confident that we can count, or we don't have critical faculties to be able to think about whether or not we are counting the right things. By eliminating the aspects of the world which do not fit our theories, either because they're too diverse or because they're too complicated, we are misled into conceiving of the world solely in terms of our theories. And that's the dualism and then choosing one side that Torrance stands against. We literally recreate the world in a measurable form that will fit within our thinking, which means we're going to be blind to, not attentive to everything else. So he goes then on for several of these subsections, just rethinking through decision and reason and choice and conflict, the things that we think differently about other people. Winners and losers with detached reason and emotion are going to have heated logic, fighting with one another. Their emotions haven't been educated, and they will simply live out of neglect of the ability to personally listen and respond to one another and grow together. So he envisions this participative reason, not retreating from the world in contemplation, but concern for the world and its richness with a transformation of values and communion and appreciation for the world's wonder and diversity. So that is the invitation of church and theological community and all that into this new place. And at the top of page 5, the last sentence in the paragraph there, prayer is a participative reason to realign us with the purposes of God. So prayer isn't just coming to put our coins in the machine to see if we get lucky and get what we hope God gives us. It is literally the reforming of our thinking, the transformation of our thinking, so that we think God's thoughts with him and act in response to God's being with us and for us. In that section is where he talks about playing and exploring, and say that the whole nature of what we have called formal is it often keeps us from being playful. You think of the classroom with a dusty chalkboard. We should be playing on the playground of life, learning to listen and live and learn, and to grow into what it is there. We need to internalize play space so we can explore external space. And that is, I think, the interface, Dwayne, that you talked about before, is the interface of the internal and the external world, so that we play, in a sense, in both in a process of discovery. Chapter 4 then realizing truth. Ultimately, truth is going to be the way that we engage or relate to that which is other than ourself. And again, he talks about a variety of things. G at the top of page 6. There are three kinds of things about which things are true. One is God, and God is always true. Created things, those are found things, and those are always true only in being contingent on the creator. And then creations are things that are made within creation and contingent on creators. He hinted at maybe a fourth thing, if there are computers and computers make things, which I put in there, the D then, artificial intelligence is made things, make things, right? So that's a fourth category within his paradigm that he pointed to, but it wasn't around enough at the time that he lived. So that's a new kind of thinginess within the paradigm that he was pointing to. To be able to get truth, you have to be able to identify falsehood, and then ultimately an eye to be able to recognize the truth. The recognition of the truth is to have our thinking be aligned with reality in such a way that truth is what we end up with. In the final section on living understanding, again, this is the whole sense of living in a world as it is in an investigative kind of way, understanding the involvement of our emotive life, our thought life, our active life, in our whole engagement with the world, the way we're careful with the things that could get in the way, which again, the whole church dogmatics is that careful acknowledging where things get off, and then the ability to choose and live within the limitations of that which will bring fruitfulness, so that in the end we avoid all ways that formalism leads us into fundamentalism and things that become destructive. And we live with, and again in P, intuition is one of Torrance's favorite words. It's the wisdom that's able to see and keep learning in face of what it is that comes along in life, to have a supervening vision. We need not depend on formal knowledge with its conditionality. We need knowledge that guides and reveals as clues and pointers to the truth. In the first instance, the living God, and then everything else is implied as God's creation to be those who learn about it. And formal logic and language is all fine for that, as long as we see it all in the context of the created world given to us by God. So that's a quick run through that. This book is a very rich book. In every section I found I could spend a lot of time. I don't know if you had a sense of that, Bill, when you were reading through that. There's just a lot here to unpack. And it's something that's definitely worthy of pursuing further on in life, and I will certainly do that. Maybe my favorite book of them so far. The other one, I think Fetus was also a very good one as well, but they really, I think, provide something that's truly in line with Torrance's work, but clarifying and providing examples that are helpful as well. So next week is going to be a discussion of my article in the Holy Spirit edition of Participatio. I've asked several people to be an interviewer, and I have one out right now. See if I think it's Jordy Ziegler, to see if he'll be an interviewer. But anyway, that is the content for next week. I will post what the text is if you want to look at that. It's Thomas Torrance and T.F. Smale on understanding the nature of the value of what both of them looked at in correcting and guiding the Church of the Holy Spirit, and particularly what it is that Tom Smale did in furthering the work that people often say Torrance missed, and how he lived it and spoke it and wrote it. So that's a pretty extensive work there. And Todd says, off topic, what we call sin when we attempt to share TFT's, Athanasius, St. Paul's version, the gooder news of our triune God of unconditional love and forgiveness. Evangelicals sometimes insist that they don't believe sin matters. So, I mean, the whole nature for Torrance and Bart and Athanasius, sin is what God does not choose. God says yes to humanity, and we choose things that say no to God and what God chooses. And God says no to our no with his yes. The cross is God's yes to humanity that recognizes that we've said no to God. And he's saying, yes, I love you, even though you said no. And in the cross, I say no to the shame and the blame and the defeat of what would be there because of the choices that you make contrary to me. But in the end, my yes is proclaimed here. And you can live responding to my yes as a yes, or you can just huddle around your nose and try and warm your hands in the night, but it won't put off any warmth. Your nose will not warm or give life to you because you are separated from the very source of life, the yes that I speak to you. And his yes is an unconditional yes, but it does have the consequence of saying no to our no's because he sees that they destroy us and he will not leave us in our self-destruction. I don't know if that helped or not at all. That was a little bit more of a Bart. I've just been going through those sections in Bart in a sense. So those are dominant in my thinking. So
yeah, that was an excellent apologetic, Marty, and probably better rhetorically than I tend to put it to my evangelical friends who attack me as being anything goes.
yeah, and I just say no, it's definitely not anything goes. There's one God with one unconditional yes who will always be for us and with us, and he literally creates the space within which we can say no. But even to our no, he addresses that with a love that says no when it's destructive. So he doesn't say anything goes because his redemptive love will always work at reconciling and redeeming in a way that is restorative. And so God is profoundly restorative as Father, as Son, as Holy Spirit. God demonstrates his love for us, and that while we are yet sinners, Christ dies for us. God's wrath is a no. God's wrath is a no, is in love to our sin. God's wrath is a no.
God's wrath is an aspect of his love that says no to our sin.
Yeah.
Well, something like that.
Yeah. Wrath is a capital N there. No. God's no is a no in his love, which is a capital S, to our sin, which is our no. And even when he sinned, there's this other capital N word that Bart uses, and that is nevertheless. You have said no to me. Nevertheless, I will continue to say yes to you. I will forgive. I will restore. I will not give up on you.
Yeah. Sorry about the typo.
No, that's fine.
Well, that's that whole area of freedom that's the area there that seems to be the critical point, with Paul Molnar's work and because that's what John McKenna, his book was a book on freedom at the same time as it was the God of freedom and the freedom of God, and
yeah.
that's what we can't handle. Someone was asking the stupid question, what does it mean to be uncreated? And they're thinking that was an atheist argument against God because he's uncreated. So what does that mean? How could I'm just like, people are so out of touch with reality.
Yeah.
And having, it's just the simplest thing, like, why is there something instead of nothing? And it's just like, well, because the uncreated God has the power to create something from nothing because he is. I am.
Yeah.
Well,
the phrase, what does it mean to say God is uncreated? Though, what does it mean is what in this book is the formal trying to capture God and put God in a box. It's like that is one being one cannot capture. One has to deal with what is, not which fits into your mental constructs.
For sin though, he's made it possible because every creature he makes is less than him. Every environment he makes is less than him. And that's what people don't understand. He is wholly other, that HWHOLLY. Once you understand God in the category of wholly other and unique, and there's no one like him, you got to understand there is a fear of the Lord that is justified. And, they respond to say, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Like we miss that in a lot of our thinking, and because of our confusion.
Yeah. People think the holy other just means distant. And it's like, no, it's distinct. He's present,
unique
but
category.
Distinct. So again, this is where the language becomes problematic, that people don't they don't understand because they haven't allowed their thinking to be informed by God's own self-revelation of what being wholly other might mean. And
Well,
often
God's plan is bigger than just, well, you sin, because we understand sin as an ontological way of being that's only temporary. Why? Because the mediator is going to deal with it. And that's what, we're not saying that that isn't true. We know that's absolutely true, because God in love has to destroy that. And that's the thing. As soon as he brings us into his presence, what isn't purified and refined and able sustained by Jesus is automatically going to be consumed by his fire, his glory, his awesomeness. Sin is real.
Okay,
good. That's a good point there, Todd. Thanks for extending there, Marty. Good question, Todd.
Not a problem. Great stuff. And thank you all for being here today. And we will catch you next week.
Thanks, Todd.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See y'all.